looking at how do we select observations in Stata, where essentially the goal is that we don't want to run the command in the entire data set, but on some specific observations in the data set. We talked about one way that you can select observations, that is using in, which selects by observation number. So now we want to talk about another way that we can select observations in Stata so that the command applies to those particular observations and not on the entire data set. The second way is to use if. In selects by, like we talked about, okay, in selects by observation number. If selects by condition, right? So if is going to select based on some condition. So the if qualifier is followed by an expression that evaluates either to true and false. If that condition is true, so it's going to apply that command, whatever you specified, to those observations. And for those observations, for which the expression is false, it's not going to apply the command whichever you specify to those observations. So like in, if is placed at the end of the command before options, just before the comma. So now one thing that in particular should be noted is that when we're creating a new variable, so we use a single equal to sign. Like if I want to generate, like if you want to generate a variable, generate score is equal to 15, you'll only use one equal to sign. But when you're using if statements, you always have to use two double equal to signs, right? If you want to use an if statement, given that, whenever in an if statement, if you have to use an equal to sign, you have to make sure you use double equal to, right? So double equal to is used with if statements, right? If you want to use an equal to sign. So instead of using a single equal to sign, you use double. And if you have labeled numeric variables, like we have a categorical numerical variable with value labels. In that case, when you're using if to impose a condition, right, so you have to make sure you use the actual value, the numeric variable, and not the value label attached to it. Let's look at an example. So we have this, we're using a sysuse auto data set. Say you want to summarize the price of domestic cars. So if we just quickly browse this one, it's domestic cars, right? So we can see domestic is a numeric variable with value labels, right? Actual value coded is 0, but it has a value labeled domestic, right? Similarly, actual value coded is 1, but it has a value labeled foreign. So if I want to impose a condition on foreign, I only want domestic cars, right? So I'll say foreign is double equal to 0, not domestic, right? Because that's just a value label. That's not the actual value coded in it, right? The value coded is written over here, right? So if you have if you have a numeric variable value label, so you have to make sure you use the actual value and not the value labels. Right, so like for example, like over here, we said we wanted to summarize the price of domestic cars. So we'll do summarize price if foreign is double equal to 0. We won't say summarize price if foreign is double equal to domestic, right? Because the actual value coded is 0. So you have to make sure if you have numeric variables with value labels, when you're using the if condition, you use the actual values, right? Not the value labels. So now this is basically finding us. This is applying the command summarize price to only a subset of observations. Those observations are the domestic cars in this case. And whenever you want to impose a condition on a string variable, you need to make sure the values of the string variables are always written in inverted commas. Right? For example, if I want to list the observation for Toyota Corolla, now make is a string variable, right? Right? It's a string variable, right? Here, notice that now when I want to, now this is a string variable, right? This is not a numeric variable with value label. So when you want to impose condition on it, so you're going to tell list if make is double equal to Toyota Corolla, and you make sure because it's a string variable, you include its value in inverted commas. Now, how is this different from this? Like if you notice the red variables whose observations appear in red are basically string variables in Stata, and those whose observations appear in blue are numeric variables with value labels. Over here, domestic was just a value label. This was not a string variable. If this was a string variable in red color, then we would have done foreign is double equal to domestic in inverted commas. But this was actually a numeric variable, and these domestic and foreign were just value labels, because when I press domestic, we get a 0 here. But when I press these, I actually get the value over here, right? So if it's a string variable, then yes, you use the string value e in inverted commas. But if it's a numeric variable with value label, you make sure you use the actual value coded and not the value label. We were talking about how in selects by observation number and if selects by condition, but you can also use if to select by observation number by either using if with underscore n, or using if in list, or using if in range. And we also talked about how in cannot be used to select non-consecutive observations, right? The alternative for that is that you can either use if with underscore n, or you can use if in list. In that case, we can also select non-consecutive observations, something that in can't do. So in selects by observation number, if selects by condition, but if we pair if with underscore n, or use it with in list, or use it with in range, we can also select observations by observation number. And we can also use, and unlike in, it can actually be also able to select non-consecutive observations using if with underscore n or using if in list. There's already another video on this.